Hello, inner shifters, how you doing? Your host, Sophia here. Grab a comfy seat, maybe a warm drink, because this is one of those conversations that needs both compassion and courage. Let's talk heart to heart about something that touches so many lives, yet still feels like a quiet topic: the cultural and generational misconceptions about mental illness. And let's do it in a way that lifts, not weighs. Because while this subject is serious, there's so much light in it too, so much potential for healing, understanding, and connection. So let me just start by saying this. If you've ever felt misunderstood because of your mental health, if someone brushed off your struggles or told you to just get over it, you're not alone. Not even close. That pain, the pain of being unseen, is real. But so is the hope on the other side of it. And that's where I want to take us. You see, for generations, mental illness has been coded in silence, wrapped in stigma. In a lot of cultures, and I'll say this with love, it's been seen as something you either hide, deny, or worst of all, blame on personal weakness. I've heard stories from people across continents, families who whispered about depression like it was a scandal, parents who told their kids that anxiety was just a phase, grandparents who called therapy a luxury for people who don't know how to be grateful. I once knew a woman named Amara, born and raised in a community where strength was everything. She said in her house, showing emotion was seen as a liability. So for years, she wore a mask. Smiled at work, handled responsibilities, but inside she was crumbling. She told me I thought something was broken in me, because no one around me ever admitted to hurting like I did. It wasn't until she overheard a podcast about trauma and emotional resilience that something clicked. "Oh, that's me," she said. They were describing me. It was a turning point. Not because someone fixed her, but because for the first time, she didn't feel alone. That's the power of speaking up, of seeing yourself in someone else's truth. Now, generationally, we've made huge strides. Younger people today are far more open about mental health. They talk about therapy the way our grandparents talked about aspirin. But that gap, that generational space between buckle up and deal with it, and it's okay to get help, it's still there. And it can feel like trying to translate two very different languages. I remember chatting with a guy named Miguel who told me his father used to say, "There's no such thing as depression, just laziness." Harsh, right? But when we talked more, Miguel realized something important. His father wasn't being cruel. He was scared, because he didn't know another way. He grew up in a time and place where survival meant pushing through, where vulnerability could put you in danger. For him, emotional pain was something you shoved into a corner and kept moving. So when Miguel talked about his panic attacks, his dad didn't understand. Not because he didn't love him, but because he'd never been given the tools to see pain that wasn't visible. There's something tender about that. The idea that so many of our misconceptions come not from malice, but from fear, from lack of exposure, from stories that were never allowed to be told. In some cultures, mental illness is seen through a spiritual or moral lens. You're possessed, cursed, not praying enough. That can feel incredibly isolating if you're someone who's just trying to survive depression or navigate PTSD. But even there, the conversation is shifting. Slowly, yes, but it is shifting. I met a man at a community event, let's call him Ade, who said he grew up being told that therapy was for the weak. But after losing someone close to him and spiraling into grief he couldn't climb out of, he did something unheard of in his family. He saw a counselor, quietly at first, just a few sessions. He said it felt like learning to breathe again. When he finally told his mother, she was shocked, but then she said something he didn't expect. "I wish I had that when your father died." That moment, that was legacy breaking. That was healing that went backward and forward. Because here's the truth no one tells you. When you decide to heal, you don't just heal yourself. You start to heal generations of silence that came before you, and those that might have come after you too. It's not easy. Let's not pretend it is. When culture, upbringing, and old beliefs are involved, even the idea of mental illness can feel taboo. You might feel torn between loyalty and honesty, between love and truth, between keeping the peace and owning your pain. But you don't have to choose one or the other. You can love your family, honor your roots, and still say, I need help, I hurt, I deserve peace. One of the most motivating things I've ever seen is how people who once whispered their stories now speak them into microphones. How therapy sessions that used to be secrets are now celebrated as self-love. How someone like you, just by being brave enough to share their truth, gives someone else permission to do the same. I remember a college student named Layla who started a support group on her campus. She had grown up hearing that anxiety was just a lack of faith, that if she trusted enough, she wouldn't feel scared. But her panic attacks didn't disappear with prayer, and she felt ashamed, like she was failing spiritually. It wasn't until she met a mentor who said, God made your brain and your heart. Getting help doesn't mean you don't believe, it means you believe in healing. Oh, that line hit her like thunder. She took it, made it her mantra, and turned it into something beautiful. That group now has over 50 students, many of whom had never even said out loud what they were feeling before. That's the ripple effect of one brave voice. So if you're reading this, nodding along, maybe with a lump in your throat, let me just say, you're already doing something powerful. You're bringing awareness to a place that's long been avoided. You're unlearning, relearning, and maybe even teaching others along the way. And I know sometimes that journey comes with pushback. With relatives who roll their eyes, friends who tell you to toughen up, elders who say, we survived worse. But survival isn't the same as healing. You don't have to choose to just survive anymore. You're allowed to thrive. Your mental health matters not because someone else validates it. It matters because you matter. Your pain is real. Your healing is real. And your hope, that's real too. This generation, your generation, our generation, is rewriting the story. We're saying that seeking help isn't weakness, it's wisdom. That therapy isn't indulgent, it's responsible. That talking about emotions isn't embarrassing, it's liberating. That medicine can be holy. That self-awareness can be cultural pride. That sharing your story doesn't dishonor your family, it honors your humanity. So if no one else has told you this today, let me be the one. You are not broken. You are not weak for feeling. You are strong for choosing truth. You are wise for choosing healing. And you are not, have never been alone in this. We are many. We are learning. We are loving. We are changing the narrative. Keep going, keep speaking, keep healing. And when the doubt creeps in, as it sometimes will, remember this. The courage to be emotionally honest in a world that has long praised silence is nothing short of revolutionary. And revolution, my friend, always starts with a whisper that becomes a roar. So I'm here for the roar, and I know you are too. Let's settle in and talk like friends, like allies. Because the experience of navigating mental health at work, of asking for accommodations, of dealing with misunderstanding or subtle dismissal, it's personal, and it deserves a personal, soulful conversation. So here's what I want to say straight from the heart. If you've ever felt like you had to wear a mask at work just to be accepted, I see you. The workplace, for all its talk of productivity and professionalism, often forgets something vital, that we're human first. And humans, we carry invisible things. Anxiety that spikes before a morning meeting. Depression that makes answering one more email feel like climbing Everest. PTSD that flares at sudden noises or conflict. The truth is, mental health exists on every office floor, in every department, on every Zoom call. But too often, it's treated like a liability instead of a reality. I once met a guy named Jamal who worked in tech, sharp, driven, the kind of guy who never missed a deadline. But he quietly battled bipolar disorder, and when he disclosed it after experiencing a rough patch, he noticed something shift. His manager stopped giving him important projects. Coworkers said things like, "You're so brave," with that tone that feels more like pity than support. Eventually, he was let go after a minor conflict, even though his track record was stellar. He told me it wasn't the illness that hurt the most, it was the assumption that I couldn't handle life. That story stuck with me. Because Jamal wasn't fragile. He was fighting silently, showing up every day. And he deserved better than silence or suspicion. That's what workplace discrimination looks like when it wears polite clothes. It's not always blatant. Sometimes it shows up as being passed over for opportunities. Sometimes it's being left out of decision-making, or constantly having to prove that your condition doesn't define your worth. That pressure alone exhausting. And let's talk about accommodations, the legal right in many countries to have support if your mental health affects your work. Things like flexible hours, a quiet space to decompress, extended deadlines during flare-ups. Reasonable, humane stuff. But so many don't even ask for them. Not because they don't need them, but because they're scared. Scared of retaliation. Scared of being seen differently. Scared of being told they're making excuses. I remember this woman named Priyanka who struggled with panic attacks, especially in large team meetings. She mustered the courage to ask her HR rep if she could attend virtually on tough days or get meeting notes afterward when she had to step out. The response, "We're worried that might set a precedent." A precedent for compassion, for basic support. You see, that's where we have work to do. The law may allow for accommodations, but the culture hasn't always caught up. And that's where change needs to happen in hearts, not just handbooks. But you know what gives me hope? People are speaking up. Bit by bit, they're refusing to be ashamed. There's a man I admire, he's a high-level executive, who wrote a company-wide email saying he was taking a mental health leave. Not because he had to explain himself, but because he wanted others to see that it was okay. That their minds mattered. Afterward, employees reached out and said, "Thank you. Now I know I'm not alone." That's the ripple effect. That's leadership. Here, what I want you to know: if you're in this fight, quietly or loudly, you are not a burden. Accommodations aren't special treatment, they're equity in action. They're what bridges the gap between someone barely coping and someone truly thriving. And every time you advocate for yourself, even if your voice shakes, you're making space for someone else to feel safe too. It's frustrating when people say, "Just manage it better," as if mental illness is a lack of effort. As if it hasn't taken you everything to show up, to sit at your desk, to hit send on that email. But you are not weak. You are navigating an invisible terrain and still finding your way forward. That's not weakness. That's warrior work. I once ran into a man after a conference. He pulled me aside and said, "I've lived with social anxiety my whole life. And every workday feels like walking into a fire. But no one sees it because I've mastered pretending." He said he'd never told anyone, but he wanted to start. Just telling that story, that was his revolution. We change the system by telling the truth. By asking for what we need. By refusing to believe that professionalism means pretending. You belong in that meeting, in that office, on that leadership team, not despite your mental health journey, but because of the resilience it's given you. Because of the empathy you've earned. Because of your unique wiring, your deep insight, your capacity to hold space and solve problems in ways no one else can. So if you ever feel like shrinking to fit into a system that doesn't yet understand you, do. I'll expand. I'll ask. I'll push. And if the door doesn't open, knock louder. Or build a better door. The future of work is not one size fits all. It's soft where it used to be hard. It's real where it used to be polished. And it's compassionate where it used to be cold. You, my friend, are already leading us there. Let's open up something tender together. This one's personal for so many of us. Let's talk like we're curled up on the couch, shoes off, guards down, and we finally exhaled after carrying too much for too long. This topic, self-stigma, the shame and negative beliefs we carry about ourselves when it comes to needing help for our mental health, well, it cuts deep. It's one thing to face misunderstanding from others. That's hard. But when the judgment lives inside you, when you're the one telling yourself that you're weak, that you should be able to handle it, that going to therapy means you've somehow failed, that's a special kind of lonely. And a special kind of untrue. I want to tell you a story about someone I once knew. Let's call him Nico. He was the kind of guy everyone relied on. Funny, grounded, a helper in every sense. But underneath, he was struggling. Anxiety so thick he couldn't sleep. Panic attacks he chalked up to bad digestion. He told himself to push through, to man up, to be grateful that his life wasn't worse. And he wore that mask every single day. Until one night, alone in his apartment, he had a panic attack so intense he thought it was a heart attack. And as he sat there, shaking, drenched in sweat, he whispered to himself, "What is wrong with me?" That question wasn't new, it had been echoing in his head for years. But that night, something shifted. He told me later, I realized I wasn't afraid of help, I was afraid of what it meant about me to ask for it. That's self-stigma. It's the silent shame that creeps in and convinces us that struggling makes us flawed. That vulnerability equals weakness. That seeking support is something you do only after you've failed at fixing it yourself. But here's what I want us to say back to those thoughts, kindly, firmly, like a friend who won't let you forget your worth. That's not the truth. The truth is that life is hard sometimes. Brains get imbalanced. A trauma leaves marks. A chemistry shift. Loss guts us. And none of that is your fault. It took Nico 6 more months to book his first therapy session. But when he did, you know what he said after? "I wish I'd done this sooner. I thought admitting I needed help would break me. But it was the first thing that gave me my life back." I've seen this over and over, people silently punishing themselves for being human. Saying things like other people have it worse, or it's just in my head, or I shouldn't be like this. As if pain has to reach some arbitrary threshold to be valid. As if the fact that we can function means we're fine. But suffering quietly is still suffering. And being high-functioning and hurting at the same time, that's incredibly common. And incredibly exhausting. I once met a woman, her name was Elise, who was a nurse. She cared for others every day, but wouldn't let herself feel cared for. She told me, "I've seen people on psych wards. I'm not like that." And even as she said it, her voice cracked. Because inside, she was hurting. And even if her pain looked different, it was still real. Still deserving of healing. Self-stigma thrives in comparison. In pride. In silence. It says, "Don't make a fuss. Handle it yourself. Strong people don't need help." And you know what? Those voices are old. Generational. Inherited. They don't belong to you. They were built in times when mental health wasn't understood. When survival meant suppression. But you, right here, right now, you get to choose a different story. You get to say, "Yes, I struggle. And no, that doesn't make me less." You get to say, "I'm worthy of support, not after I've earned it now." You get to believe that going to therapy, talking about your pain, asking for medication, or simply saying, "I'm not okay," is brave. and powerful and deeply human. I'll never forget the moment a young man told me he wrote down a therapist's number but couldn't make himself call. He'd dial, then hang up, over and over. Not because he didn't want help, but because every time a voice in his head said, "What if they judge you too?" That voice wasn't his truth. It was his fear. And when he finally called and went in, his therapist smiled gently and said, "I'm glad you're here." That sentence alone helped rewrite a decade of shame. So let me say it to you, I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you're even thinking about this. That you're opening the door, even just a crack, to the idea that needing help doesn't mean something is wrong with you. It means you're aware. It means you care. It means you want more for yourself. Healing from self-stigma isn't instant. It takes time to unlearn the harsh voices we absorbed. It takes time to replace guilt with self-compassion. But it starts with a simple, powerful thing, the choice to be honest. To let light into the places you've hidden from. To say, I can love myself even when I'm not at my best. You are not too broken. You are not a burden. You are not weak for needing help. And you are never, ever alone in this. When you step toward help, you don't just change your own life, you light the way for someone else too. Maybe your little brother who's scared to say he's overwhelmed. Maybe a coworker who's Googling symptoms in secret. Maybe a parent who never knew therapy could be soft and healing, not shameful. And if you ever forget why it's worth it, come back to this, because you are worthy of peace. Because healing is possible. Because the story you were told about what it means to struggle wasn't the whole story. You get to write your own. I thank you so much for listening to this podcast. Remember to like, follow, subscribe, and do all those lovely things you wonderful people do. I'll see you next time.